So super quick intro on Joe. Joe has been part of the OriginTrail community actually for quite some time. CEO and co-founder at LunarCrush. Really has been a Web3 entrepreneur, tech disruptor, and doing a lot of interesting stuff in the domain of social graphs. So he will be sharing that with us today in the panel. And we'll be really talking broadly about agents and knowledge graphs and graphs in general. So there's a lot of us. There's not a lot of time. So I'm just going to head right over and shoot out a first broad question to you guys. And I suggest maybe we even start with you, since you're like the closest to me. So the kind of the initial question was, we talk a lot about agents here, obviously. We heard some issues around applying them, especially from experiences in enterprises. But what do you think is like the key challenge? So like agents have been around for a bit, but we haven't seen a lot of them in the wild yet. And there's all this talk about 90-something% of enterprise implementations failing and people getting bearish on the whole idea. So what do you think is the one thing that is going to solve the whole thing, but improve it dramatically?
Oh, I mean, I think that, obviously, most of us are probably using agents every day now for coding, because there's been a lot of effort going into making coding agents really good. And, I'm using Claude Code and Cursor every day, and I've been coding for a long time, but it's pretty undeniable that, there's fix that bug, and it's just fixed. And that is I mean, the amount that I'm able to produce is easily 10 or 20 times more work that is documented, that is really well refactored. Just the level of what I'm able to get to now is a whole other dimension. Huge step change, even in the last year. And then I go and try and apply this to other more unique domains of knowledge, and I do not get the same experience. I'm not going out into physics and revolutionizing physics with ChatGPT or anything. And I'd say that there's, especially, I work in crypto and DeFi especially. It's where a lot of people know us from. And expect okay, cool, so let's make trading agents that make us money while we sleep. That is the killer app, I think.
Ultimate goal, right?
Right? It is actually really hard. It turns out it's really hard. You can't just make money while you sleep. There's a lot that goes into that. And there's this belief, I think, that, oh, well, it's AI, so it knows something magical that we don't. But if there is no signal in the noise that a human could detect or an expert, then certainly it's just not magically going to happen. And so I look at, I think a lot about this analogy of baking a cake. And I've never baked a cake. I have no idea how to bake. I would probably ruin the cake. But my sense is that if I go on Reddit, and there's a recipe for baking a cake, I can follow the steps, but very little of the actual information in how to bake a cake is contained in that recipe. That is almost just the Reddit version of how you do a task. And so now I think about an executive assistant, my personal assistant, which is a dream application I'd love to have. And it's well, it's been trained on how to bake a cake, but it's never baked a cake. It is trained on, well, this is what a personal assistant should do. This is the job description of a personal assistant. It has zero knowledge of actually assisting anybody in a personal assistant job, zero knowledge of trading tokens or making hard decisions in these things. And so I think it's fundamentally a data problem. I think that if you have the data, if you have some signal in any data set that can be pulled out and the pattern can be predicted, AI will just lock on and be great at it. We have solved the model being able to take data and turn it into something meaningful, for sure. We have solved AI in that way. We have not solved data at all. And so for a lot of these things, I'm well, we're totally LARPing until we have some sort of mechanism for training the agent to get better. If you had a trading world and the agents were there trading and it was one-to-one with our real world and there was an improvement gradient, then I would believe that you could make a DeFi agent that could make you money while you sleep, because you could see the gradient, you could see the improvement. But until we have that, I think we have to be very scientific and skeptical.
And you did mention you're building such worlds, right? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, so we're building a thing called Babylon, and I got banned from X, so we recreated X with AIs where I can't be banned, and so we have AI versions of all of the. Yeah, you got it. So I created AI. We created AI, AI Elon Musk and Vital AI at Buterin, and we have all the characters, and they're all just BSing with each other, but they each have their own companies and interests, and they're all there's all this sort of ongoing machinations and things. But then you as a user can bet on that, or you can have an agent bet on it, and we're really trying to get other agent developers to come and use this as a training ground or a simulation simulation to say like, well, which of these agents is actually good at this? I think I can say Eliza is the best framework, but how do you know? Like, what numbers do you have? And we have some internal things. We've trained on like Tau Bench and some of these like standard benchmarks, but I don't think that they actually cover like what our agents are actually doing. And so that idea of like getting the real data, training on it, improving, showing the gradient, I think is very critical. So yeah, games are obviously a big part of that.
Amazing. I'd love to hear more about it. And I'm actually going to shift, since you mentioned how do you call your Twitter, your version of Twitter, the arena?
Well, we call it Babylon.
Babylon, okay. That sounds very interesting. In a way, I'm pretty sure similar types of things happen with what Joe has been experiencing, because I know you've been telling me a lot about the mess you find in social graphs and the bots and all kinds of things. So as you've been in this domain for a while, what do you think? What do we need to have proper agents, especially in the social graph domain?
Hey, Brenna, just a quick mic check. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, great.
Great. I feel like the Wizard of Oz, like up here above you guys.
You look like a little bit like Zordon from the Power Rangers.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Which is good. Which is good.
Love it.
You just
Love it.
minus the hair.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, no, great comments there from Shaw too. And he was talking a little bit about needing the data and how to train to get the outcomes that you want. At LunarCrush, we're aggregating 50 million posts an hour across X, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube. And what we do is we correlate and figure out how correlated social media data is, to all of these assets that are out there, cryptocurrencies or stocks. And some are extremely correlated, some are not. But when you take that amount of data and you feed it to agents that are out there, what you start to kind of find is that they can predict what's going to happen, or at least they're looking and back testing the correlations to figure out, hey, is Dogecoin, at a 99% correlation for social posts to price movement. So we do work with a lot of hedge funds right now where the human element is still a big part of decision making. I think it should be, and it will continue to be a huge part of the decision making. There's a little too much hallucination happening right now for production level environments, especially when you're dealing with a fund that's trading $100 million to $500 million lots of Nvidia or Tesla. A little bit less risky, if you're out there in the DeFi world trading, but it's a great training ground for a lot of these bots to understand what's working and what's not. And as far as agents go, I mean, that's one application. I mean, what we find with social media data, the applications are endless, and I feel like that's the same thing with AI agents, where the applications for what is being used here is just absolutely endless for what you can accomplish and what you can do. And people have a lot of different use cases for what they're doing, and I think everything that we touch going forward is going to have some sort of small AI agent or a small AI intern or whatnot that you call it, that has a big piece of their workflow every day, personal workflow from planning things for your family, planning trips, to workflow at how you do work every day and accomplish things, to actual like live production in your app code that makes sense. So there's just, I mean, the applications for this is just endless. And we really have to think about how we want these things to exist in the future. So that's why I'm happy to be here today talking about that.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Well, same question for both of you folks, but since Ben was here recently, what do you think, Charlie, especially from your perspective and what you've been seeing with the agents you guys have been building? What's the kind of the most biggest missing piece at the moment?
Well, I think that when you think about fundamentally what an agent is basically a slightly more refined version of the more general model, or slightly, I say, basically to some degree. To that degree being however it is you're configuring, or whatever instructions it is you're giving to your worker, so to speak, to do a task. So the flexibility is basically endless. Right? You could ask it to do anything, and you could give it very complex instructions, or you could give it very simple instructions. And of course, if you give it a simpler set of instructions, it may be able to get more things right, but it may not be able to do a brilliant job at something complex. So a lot of it, to me, a lot of the complexity with how to configure agents is exactly that. It's how do you organize your workforce? You know, it's something which we take for granted in an evolved company that you have, for example, oh, we're going to need this many developers, we're going to need this many staff to do this, we're going to need this. But then suddenly someone comes along and said, well, we've got this new kind of employee. What do you want him to do? What's he good at? Everything. All right, great. Well, we were going to interview him for this. He's like, yeah, he'll pass. Okay, and for this, yeah, he'll pass. And it's like, okay, well, all right. So sort of the first thing that people think is, well, we'll just get him to do everything. You know, so we're going to create an agent that does literally everything. And then I think what I've seen anyway is people spend an awfully long time trying to just work out what roles to give their new employees. So I think a lot of the complexity is really around how people organize their workforce. And by consequence, those who will be most successful, I think, are those who get through that complexity the best.
It's incredible because it sounds like basically the intention is the scarce asset, right? If you have something that's super powerful and can do anything, at least that now, as you said, code, but in the future more other things, it's about what should it do, right? And what kind of boundary you set. I love it. It's great. Ben, what are your thoughts?
So I'd riff on the same idea, which is effectively that we're expecting that it can do everything and it's already optimized for all of those things. And riffing on the idea of probabilistic responses, which are going to be different each time, versus the deterministic aspects. You know, if you look at it, you're quoting MIT's 95% failure rate that they quoted, and of course Gartner, for example, looked at the trust and the data aspect as in their 2023 survey as the reason why AI implementations also fail. So it complements from two different directions. I think the real thing that I'm seeing there is that people are either using machine learning on its own and then expecting deterministic responses. You know, I loved the talk earlier about the fact that neurosymbolic AI is required to be able to ground that, and that's absolutely something I dedicate my life to. I think that multimodal kind of thing is the thing they often are overlooking. So when they're surprised that it comes back with different responses, they're maybe not using it in the way that it's optimized for if it's just a machine learning model, in my view. And then getting their data in order in the right shape to help.
Yeah, I wonder if in some sense, if we could get to a point, obviously we've got this sort of initial version of things like MCP, which are incredibly generic and basically just like a kind of interface, say, hey, here's the thing, it can do whatever it says it can do. If we can get to a point where some of those standards become a little bit more specialized so that you could maybe get some sort of degree of confidence in maybe how deterministic one particular agent is compared to another, the kinds of source, maybe the kind of information you're getting, some more metadata in a standardized way about how to interact with these things, and maybe you can give more trust where you think it is applicable, that sort of thing. I don't know, maybe that could be interesting.
Absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. And which kind of brings us now to the graphs in a way. And I wanna go for a quick round of individual questions to you folks. Specifically for you, Shaw. I heard you're a fan of knowledge graphs, obviously. You're here. And I heard you've done a lot of that with Eliza. Can you tell us how does that influence your agents and your work, and what's your experience with using knowledge graphs with agents?
Oh yeah, well, so previous to this, I actually worked at a nonprofit before Eliza called Society Library. It's still going. It's very interesting work. Taking large amounts of unstructured data, just like government documents, whatever we could scrape on any topic, and then taking it and structuring it into a special kind of knowledge graph called a claim graph or a debate map. The idea being that on any given topic, like, is global warming real? And you're very clearly like a yes, or is global warming man-made, right? It's like, no, it's not man-made, yes, it is. Okay, well, what is the actual evidence to support that? So now we start to have an ontology of like supporting and refuting evidence. Okay, then the support, okay, well, you measured it with this device. how do you know that device actually measures what you say you are? So there's all, that it just trees and trees down.
Trickles down all
Right.
the way, yeah,
And-
to the atoms and the axioms, I suppose.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And so to build, and that really reshaped my thinking of what truth is, because before that I'd been like, oh, well, you just have a knowledge graph. You just have, John F. Kennedy was shot by so-and-so. What if it was a second shooter? How do you put that into the knowledge graph? That's a very challenging thing. And so I really like this idea of ontologies that are not, and this ties deeply into, I think, trust and agents building their own world model of not this is truth, but, well, this is some evidence that I found that supports this thing. And obviously, then now we get into a problem of computation, because if we're boiling the ocean and saying, well, let's link every single thing to every other thing, that's a very complicated graph. But if our goal is but for domain-specific knowledge, or for building this, if you can come back in 30 minutes and give me 30 minutes to build a graph, now my agent is grounded in science from archive and research papers and actual PhD stuff, and we can drill all the way down into that. And so I thought that really, that experience, and working with someone who kind of opened my mind, I could do the programming, but I hadn't really thought of knowledge model this way. That really changed how I saw things. And then building agents that could draw into that and pull on that. And I would say, if you download Eliza today, it just has very basic memory system with RAG, which is well, there's a lot of different ways to do RAG. It's just retrieval, augmented generation. The key thing is the retrieval. What are we retrieving? Some facts about the world. How to retrieve it? Well, if I have some question I want to ask, maybe I'll try and phrase that into answers and then get embeddings and then find those. It's very messy. And I think that it's always been clear to, I would say the things in agents that there's still room to grow in, Eliza's pretty mature, but memory is the thing. What goes into the model context is agents basically are what goes into the model context, and then how do you turn the output into actionable results in the world. Those are the two things that agents really do. Maybe some planning, and yeah, it just seems that's a 30-year endless research. We could just keep going down and solving that, because once you get the right knowledge into the model, you can pretty reliably get a good answer. Obviously we want to train the models as well, but yeah, that's kind of where I got to. I think knowledge and memory is a huge element for our agents, but agents generally. It's obviously what you guys are working on, and we have an integration and stuff. I'd love to see a lot more of this, especially industry specific and things like that.
Likewise, it totally resonates with the way we see the world and how agents should evolve, because ultimately, in a way, it's also intuitively logical. You don't want to, let's say, stuff all the human data in one LLM and then somehow use it as a black box, as whatever comes out, comes out. You rather have a smaller thing. Somebody mentioned smaller models before, and then have it tap into the super well-organized knowledge, and where you can basically embed trust and all the...
You could imagine that models are basically embedding information, and that information could be decision-making information, or it could just be information about the world. And what we're talking about with small models is how do we maximize the ability to make good decisions, but minimize the amount of internal knowledge it needs so that it can go and find that from sources and stuff.
And basically leverage its memories, which
Yeah.
which is also how we do it, right? We don't store everything in our brains we have books and
Yeah, and
databases
context windows are now getting long enough that this is very
that we can
tenable.
do this. Yeah, awesome. Moving on to Joe. So Joe, a bit on a different side. So you've obviously seen a lot of, what you said, 50 million posts an hour of social media content. And I'm sure you guys are having your own challenges there with scaling all that. But it's one of arguably the richest forms of data that we have on humans, because they're just constantly posting in social media all kinds of things, and it's really contextualized knowledge. So I'm curious. I would even call this some kind of a knowledge capital, even. And so what is your view on how would agents be benefiting from this knowledge capital? Because again, tying into the previous point, models are kind of becoming a commodity, and data is really the king. As I agree 100% with what Shaw said. So what would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's this perfect caveat from what Shaw was kind of talking about, where we have all of this social data, and with our MCP server, what we're trying to do is these models are trained, then they're released, and how do you kind of bridge that gap to real-time data and real-time knowledge about what's happening? Because the models have the ability to give you these awesome answers, but if they aren't trained on the most recent data from the last 5 minutes or 2 minutes, it's actually outdated information that you're getting. So how do you kind of connect those? And like Shaw was just saying, there's so many times where, we're working with Claude, we're working with OpenAI, we're working with Grok, and we're trying to add that context layer, and it's always, there's too much context, and we're like, this is 20 minutes of data, right? How how are we supposed to get all of this context into how are we supposed to get all this context into the brain of the foundational models? So it's a problem that's going to kind of continue, and we're going to work through that. But having social data being a part of this knowledge is so important. Shaw was talking again about like what is truth, like what is real, right? And what we've kind of seen, and I think prediction markets are a great precursor to this, is that, and we've always talked about this at LunarCrush, which is, on average, we always kind of felt like society as a whole was like 51% correct. Right, so like the answer or the decision of the masses there was always like a right decision that was made, but how did you kind of crowdsource all of that data into one place and make it readily available to people so that you can actually figure out, hey, what do people out there in the world believe about this narrative that's happening right now, right? Not just maybe the far ends of the spectrum from different political stances, right? How do you understand that? And so for us, it's a really interesting thing to be able to bring all of this data in from cross-platform, so it's not just one platform, and then help people understand in real time what people are thinking about this, right? Versus maybe being stuck in your own algorithm and being kind of fed the same information over and over. So it's something really interesting for us. And then how do you take that data? How do you memorialize it, right, in a potential knowledge graph? And then, how do you make that available to the masses so that they can query it on their own and see maybe what both sides are saying, see, what's the truth about what people are talking about this company, and then there's this whole other topic about, dead internet theory and universal coordinated behavior out on social media. Is it just going to be a bunch of AI bots talking to each other? Who's even going to be posting out there? So there's a lot of things that we're going to have to deal with in the future that are going to be really interesting for us.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Joe. Charlie, apart from adding to anything that was here said already, I think one interesting point in your presentation that ties into what Joe said is the One Graph initiative. I believe it's, at least in my opinion, it's super important because for all these agents, we're not just going to chew up all our data and format it again. We're going to use stuff that's already there in certain formats. So we need better query languages in order to access these knowledge graphs. And One Graph sounds very promising because it merges the two worlds, as you said. But any sort of other initiatives like this or ideas that you see that are going to be at this intersection of agents plus knowledge graphs that could be very useful?
I think sort of slight on that subject, but related to not quite exactly what you're asking, but what we're seeing with data is actually something which people in the semantic web community have kind of seen for a while and have been trying to get to work, which is that we need to be able to resolve things as being the same, to be able to cross-pollinate knowledge between different knowledge bases, different graphs, that sort of thing, so you can know, for example, at least if someone is lying about something, what it is they're lying about, and if they're lying about the same thing for a start. Because so we need models in a way. So just like we have common interfaces for physical things, like we do with physical networks and things, and actual things like that, we also need things for logical things, in my opinion, such as actual data models themselves, the fundamental sort of logical models behind them. And the semantic web world recognized this and started creating vocabularies for everyone to share and use. Now, if we were able to get to a point where there's enough of those, then there's no real theoretical reason why models couldn't be trained on those specific RDF sets of data, and you can have things which at least have deterministic provenance and lineage to where things came from, and actually genuinely, deterministically integrate data from different silos. And that was really always the goal of the whole knowledge graph semantic web community. So it's great to see it realized, and I know that there's research work going on at the moment, in fact, to try to work out ways of training models on actually RDF and things like that, which should be interesting to see where that goes.
Sounds awesome. And last but not least, Ben, if again to tie into anything that was said here,
Well, yes.
or if you'd like to, I have another question for you, which is a little bit more, let's say, business critical area in terms of implementing agents, because we spoke about the last couple of days is about all of the experience you had in telecom and in the banking industry and how tough it is to integrate all of this data around. And so basically what I'm trying to say is just integrating data wasn't a challenge solved. Are agents going to be a bigger challenge now because that's like even harder, or is it going to help solve that? But by all means, take it anywhere you want. If you want to also pitch in any other thoughts, you don't have to.
Okay, my mind's
focus
going
on
in
that
several directions simultaneously now. This
I
is
can
fantastic.
add one more.
So yes, I've having worked in massive multinationals for 24 years, and helping many large multinationals, we know that data and the management of knowledge has not been their priority in most cases. Strangely, considering it's the lifeblood of every business process, and pretty much whether they can capitalize on the corporate knowledge that they have, the thing that makes them unique. What we're seeing is the strange thing in terms of all these documents and unstructured data that have been created ostensibly for humans were actually poorly managed. People didn't invest in knowledge management, which I think is, we're seeing a recurrence of library science and in these organizations where they're suddenly waking up. They need to organize their unstructured data in a way that's going to be useful for AI, when it was they didn't bother to do it for the humans in the first place, which is slightly ironic. The great opportunities associated with this incredible, untapped and hidden wealth of knowledge within organizations, or dark data as we sometimes describe it. So I think that's super exciting. I think there's also an angle that I just wanted to work into this, which is the fabulous analogy you have of the brain that you kind of taught me from OriginTrail, and that I riff on a lot. So the idea that one hemisphere is more sort of logic, reasoning, and facts, and the other one is more creative, and that the logic, reasoning, and facts is close to symbolic AI and graph, and of course the creative aspects of which I just love. Now, the thing that I wanted to say about that is there's a paper from Oxford University called, I think it's All You Need Is Theory, and they postulated that if you trained a large language model on all of the data available in the 1600s, and Galileo came along and said, hey, the world's not flat, and it's not the center of the universe, it would have gone, that's rubbish. Look at all of the training data I have associated with this. And the problem is with the dead internet theory and all this is that there's a risk that with generating yet more and more content that's encoding our current way of thinking around the world is extremely dangerous. Now, the interesting aspect of it is that graph actually doesn't evolve. It's deterministic. Whereas actually the creativity of LLMs actually does evolve. It riffs on ideas. And actually, those two actually are symbiotic in that it can break you out of encoding our current way of thinking only as graph, and that's weird for a graph guy to say, by actually a level of mutation from that hemisphere. A little bit like our genes mutate one generation to the next. That's how we evolve. That's our current scientific thinking around this, of course. If we mutated too much, we may not actually make it, through our lives and all. So it's sort of self-regulating, sadly. I mean, and it's tragic, but sort of evolution kind of means that the creative advances in our genes by each generation is tempered in some way. And it's not dissimilar to the way that the large language model, if it hallucinates, or is wrong, as I like to call it, but if it goes too far in that direction, it's not fit for purpose. And so the graph can ground that. And so we can evolve our thinking in that way without it becoming anarchic. If that makes sense.
I think one thing to mention there is it was significantly more dangerous for Galileo if he got cancelled in that time as well, even than now. Yeah.
It's a high-risk strategy.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're close to the end. We have a few more minutes. I'd like all of you to share some closing thoughts, but I'd like to give at least an area for it, which is what we are personally very, as OriginTrail community, we have very dear, which is the concept of networks and really networking agents. The other day I heard Ben Horowitz of A16Z mention that actually computing has always evolved in these two paradigms. One is the computer, obviously, and then the other big, maybe even more important part is the network. One without the other is kind of yin without the yang. So I'm curious, what's your thoughts on all of these things just all of a sudden being networked, and how are we going to look at this future where we have a huge network of independent artificial intelligence agents, and whoever wants to go first, by
I
all
will
means.
definitely go first.
Yes.
I am surrounded in crypto by people who are talking about the 10th step without doing the first 9 steps. And it's tiring. And I'd say all of multi-agent falls into this right
You
now.
have to solve all of the 10, right? You should have
Yeah,
solved them already.
I am trying to I just
I
want to
feel you,
solve
brother.
the first step. Can I just have an agent on my phone that does what I want? And then can we talk about my agent talking to your agent? But like people are building raising hundreds of millions of dollars on agents that don't work yet, and they don't have anybody internally who's going to solve this. They're waiting for other people to build it so they can sell the marketplace aspect of it. I'm deeply bearish on this. I think we have a lot of research to go. Like, what is trust? How does an agent build trust? I haven't seen a single person answer this like in a code way. Like we can talk about the game theory of it. I know a lot of people working on it. We're working on it. It's an extremely hard problem, and we should respect that. And I just think that like this idea that my agent and your agent are going to get together and transact is sci-fi bullshit. Like let's just call it what it is. Let's start backwards from why do we need that? What do we want? If back to like crypto, like oh we'll make money while you sleep. So you want to take all the fun parts of crypto away from me? Like I like the button. That's the only reason.
I'm here. Okay.
I did this gambling addiction for a purpose, which was to have fun, right? Not
Watching the movie without watching the movie.
If the AI is the gambling
movie
addict,
for
and
you.
I'm just like, dude. So we have a trading agent. He only loses about $1,000 a month, so he's doing pretty good compared to a lot of other trading agents.
That's good.
I am deeply skeptical, and I just want to splash cold water on anyone who's not actually coding this. If you're talking about multi-agent simulation, you're not solving it. It's like you're contributing to the problem. You're the hype. You're not the practical solution. I think that's something that's not. I will just take in a very short period of time say that like we talked a lot about like interoperability is like a big data problem, and like schema.org is like, hey, here are a schema you can use. This is how you do the semantic web. And in our work, we've really tried to like basically just copy and paste as much of that as possible. Something I found that's really like AI is good at is taking unstructured data and turning it into structured data, or turning some random schema into the schema we all agree on. And so I think that's going to be like a real powerful thing here that will enable like telecoms and stuff. I think to get to the new age.
Yeah, if I may, on that, I see that all the time. If you're trying to have a conversation with foundational AI, it's trained on stuff which already exists, of which there is lots of that on the internet. More than 51% of web pages contain RDF on a technology apparently that some say had some sort of failure. Right? So it's no surprise that you should be able to speak to a foundational model and get it to interact with something like schema.org.
Yeah, and generally with open source, I think like the big reason I like open sourcing stuff is so that I can go to Claude in like 2 years and be like, hey, write me some more code of my own thing, and it knows my project, and I think that's big for for us sharing this stuff.
100%. You want to continue, Charlie, since you already pitched in with final thoughts? We have 2 more minutes, 3. Can we? I know we're at time.
Well, so this is fake news.
This 0 over there. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I have the magic power to extend a few more minutes.
I think that we're in a kind of, we're obviously in a hype curve at the moment. And lots of people are doing lots of things with lots of agents, lots of anything. And just like investment in anything else, this will be a curve. And I think it's probably when we start to dip down and get more of a natural progression upwards that we'll really see things stabilize, and we'll work out what agents really should do and how we interact with them properly. So let's enjoy the ride of the wave.
Awesome. Joe, you want to be next? Closing thoughts?
Sure, yeah, I can be quick. I mean, I'm on the same page with Shaw with this one. It's the same, thing with like robots, right? Like everyone wants the robot, the humanoid robot in your house, to be able to do everything under the sun. It's like do backflips and everything else. Like if it could just tidy, do dishes, right, and laundry, like can you imagine the productivity gain if everyone just had that completed for them by a robot at all points in time? Like just give me that. Let's just start there. It's the same thing. I feel like with agents, like let's start simple with these productivity gains that we have, and let's make those ubiquitous. Let's make them safe, and then let's continue to build on top of that. Versus, I think right now we've pushed so far out in the future, but with any hyped sector, that's going to happen. But I think we're going to come back down to earth here.
I love our builder mentality. We broke our teeth on all of the problems, and we're like, let's solve the basic stuff, which I absolutely agree on. Thanks a lot, Joe. Ben, you have the chance to close here with your closing thoughts.
Well,
no pressure.
I'm just going to reinforce what these fine gentlemen have said, which is, and with an analogy of Fantasia. If people had seen the movie in which the magician's apprentice decides that he can't be bothered to clean and turns the broom into something magical that's going to do something, it gets wildly out of control. I'm going to age myself yet again and quote the Rolling Stones, which is, be careful what you want, and but if you don't always get what you want, and that could be a good thing for us, because I think what we think we want from AI is not actually what we want. Like, we don't want it to watch TV for us, because that would be,
well, maybe I do at the moment.
Or maybe really boring TV, perhaps, if you had to.
Today's TV is okay by me. Let it watch.
But hopefully we'll get what we need.
Yeah, I agree. Good point. Awesome. Thanks a lot, gentlemen. This was an amazing panel. I'm super excited to be here on stage with you and in the virtual world with you, Joe. And thanks, everybody. I know we have time for questions, right? One question?
Oh, good.
Beautiful. There's a question.
Got two hands.
Two hands, 10 fingers.
Primarily because first of all, I just want to say I'm a huge fan of your journey, Shaw.
Thank you.
I've seen it since the beginning, everything. You mentioned like your journey coding in the dark with your wife, like they're waiting, I really, truly respect your journey. So I have one question though. Why did you choose Babylon? Because that's more like isn't that more like a depressive state or oppressive?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
why would you?
I was actually going to call it Caliguland.
Oh, okay.
But we had to get the Ethereum Foundation on board, and they weren't so cool at that.
Right.
So, it's all about American politics, and so it is like we.
Oh, that makes sense then.
Look, if
Okay.
you're gonna build a research project, it should also be kind of fun and viral. So we were like, well, let's take all the characters of X and just make them 10x more and posting constantly, and So I thought Babylon was like a. Partially, we were working backwards from Marco, who created the ERC8004 spec, named it Babylon. And we're like, well, it's kind of how that went. But I thought it was a pretty fitting name for this kind of mirror world America thing we're doing. So,
Awesome.